welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. And today we're honored to have my great friend, artist, author, writer, Don Smarto. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Well, welcome to my office.
Thank you. And you have so many interesting items. Can you tell us about a few of these?
Well, this painting here, and I don't know if it's great art, but it's a promise I made to someone. It was an inmate almost 40 years ago who was on death row. He painted this, and I made a promise to him. I said, wherever I go, I'll always hang this painting. And he was electrocuted in the electric chair about a year after he did this painting. Well, Gerald, over here is an actual miniature church that was made out of matchsticks by an inmate. He gave it to me in many years and has extreme detail there. And because of matchsticks, I was always hoping he wasn't an arsonist. This is very important to me because I went to Moscow after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I spoke in the largest prison in Russia, 6,500 inmates, Paterka prison. The warden asked me if I had any children. I said I had a son, and he took his hat off and said, "This is for your son." So my son reminds me that it's on loan. Well, Gerald, one of the things I have is this is an original brick from San Quentin Prison, which is in Northern California, and this is dated 1852. And this brick here is from the first prison ever built in America, and this is 1773 Newgate Prison in Connecticut. And I showed you the little church that was made out of matchsticks. An inmate made this, and again it's supposed to be a steeple and a cross, and it's actually made out of labels from cigarette packs. So I'm hoping he didn't get any lung disease. Well, Gerald, this is where I do my recordings for my radio show, which is broadcast all over Dallas and Fort Worth.
Don, you have a very interesting family history or testimony. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, from Sicily. Yeah, about 1908. And there was that great wave of immigration, but my family's unfortunately brought something with them. They brought crime from Sicily. They landed in New York and then eventually moved to Chicago. And so my grandfather worked for Al Capone producing illegal alcohol. And a lot of the serial killers were our relatives. Now, I hadn't been born yet, but I'm the youngest of three boys. But my mother would show me pictures of famous assassins and killers that we would hide in our home. One time I'm in the basement and I noticed that the wall was kind of hollow and there was a secret room. And the secret room was we hid people who were killers. And my father would have was a gambler. You almost might say a professional gambler, but on Fridays we had this uncle who would come over and for a little kid, he'd pinch my cheek and give me a $5 bill, which I thought he was great. So some years later, my mother said, "Well, you know who that was, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that was Uncle Momo." That wasn't his real name. And that was Sam Giancana, who was head of the Chicago mob in the 50s and 60s. So he'd come over and play cards on Friday night at our home. And I wish it had ended in the 1920s and 30s, but then my brothers became the greatest bank burglars in the history of America. And the crimes happened around 1980. They hit 4 banks, $4 million, got caught in the 4th bank, and I ended up being a federal witness against my own family.
Don, you had a very tough decision to make, and we may have some viewers that have negative family members or friends. What did you gain, and what did you lose?
Well, I lost my family because after I testified, my family hasn't talked to me in 40 years. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, weddings, I'm not invited. What I gained, I think, is character and integrity. Biblically, you have to make a stand at some point. And I remember going to my pastor and saying, where in the Bible does it say you can lie for your family? And we spent hours. And finally, he closed the Bible and said, it doesn't say that. You can't lie. So very quickly, I went to court, and I had 4 FBI agents guarding me. I testified, and then they left. I was all on my own. So, I live in Texas now. I've been here, 22 years. When I go back to Chicago, it's kind of a little joke. I always say I sit with my back against the wall. I'd like to see who's coming to me. So a couple of years ago, I'm invited back to my Chicago high school for a Lifetime Achievement Award. So they now have my photo over the entrance to the high school with other people's photos. And for me, it's kind of humorous because I was not a good student. I was maybe C's, maybe C minus, and I got into a lot of trouble. But I guess the thing I would want to say to young people is it's never too late to change. It's never too late to blossom. You know, that teacher who told me that I could never write, I wish I could go back now because I've written 15 books and I'd put a stack, she's gone, but I'd love to put a stack on her desk and say, you know, you disillusioned me, but the truth is, it's just never too late to blossom. I had a kid in a juvenile facility, because I speak a lot with incarcerated young people, say, well, you don't understand my situation. I'm in a gang and I can't get out of the gang. And I looked at him and said, young man, I got out of the biggest gang in America, organized crime. If I could get out, so can you.
Well, after writing 16 books, how did you get that passion, and what's your process in doing it?
It takes about three years for a book, and the first year is just research, depending on what the topic is. A lot of my books are on criminal justice. The later ones have been about spiritual themes, and then kind of like this. I'll just have all these handwritten notes, and then when I start the actual writing, what I do is, and I help other writers too. Now, I'm not a ghostwriter, but I help them. You do an outline, and you start with, sounds kind of strange, but you start with the title. Because when you got the title, then you kind of know where you're going, and then you write the end of the book first.
Wow.
Because that tells you where you're going. And so when I do my final chapter, with 10 chapters, 12 chapters, then the others kind of fall into place pretty easily. Now, it's not easy. I've told people, writing is hard work. And it's harder finding a publisher, by the way. It's a very, very competitive field. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, am I writing something on a subject no one else has? Because if you're writing on the same subject that there's 100 books, maybe it's not needed.
Now, you told us your writing process. When you're directing, there's so many more moving parts and personalities. How do you get the scene that you want?
My biggest film was an independent feature back in around 1994. And if you count all the actors who had lines, I mean, there were 50 actors, and our schedule was about 12 hours a day. So you have to be highly organized. That's really important. The part about directing that people don't understand is, if you hire the right people, you're not teaching them how to act. They know how to act, okay? What you might say is, let's do 3 versions. One is slower, one's faster, one's louder, one's softer. But aside from that, my job as a director is not to teach you how to act. If you don't know how to act, I shouldn't hire you.
Can you tell our GP family a little bit about your radio show?
I've done over 1,000 interviews on radio. I won't do it by phone. And there's a reason I won't do it by phone. I have to see you. I want to see your body language. I can tell if you're alert, if you're listening to me. You can tell, for instance, like even right now as we're talking, if you want to interrupt me, I know you're coming in. So the important thing about radio is you really have to watch the other person's face. And I would tell you, out of 1,000 interviews, I've only had really one that was bad.
Wow.
You want to know why?
Why?
Because all she said was yes or no to every question. You don't have an interview. You don't have an interview if they say yes or no and stop. I always tell people I'm broadcast, not podcast, and people get it confused. Broadcast is a very strong signal. We're out of Dallas, Fort Worth. We go pretty far. We go as far as Tyler, and we go as far as Granbury. So it's a pretty strong signal.
Don, you have spoken to parents all over the country and to youth. What are some fundamental qualities that you would tell youth that they need today to be great parents later?
Well, the first one I say in every juvenile facility is pick your friends wisely. Who you spend your time with is what you become. If you're with people that are stealing and committing armed robbery or whatever they're doing, you become like the people you spend time with. I think that's one of the reasons I tell people to go to church, is because even though we have rough edges even in church, you're with people that are trying to change. And you're with basically good people and with good values. And again, if you choose the wrong company, and even in my case, I mean, I had to get away from my own family because they weren't good for me. The other thing that I tell young people is that it's never too late to change, and that means remorse. The question they obviously ask is, how soon can I be released? And I have no part in that. I mean, if you committed a serious crime, you may be locked up for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But what I tell them is, you can change on the inside. And you can start to become the kind of person you want to be someday. And also to use your imagination. I mean, I have a son, and you know what I worried about the first year? I worried that I would be a bad father because I hadn't seen a good father. And so I literally consciously had to work at sitting down, reading stories to him, doing the kind of things that I envision.
Now, working with ministry and serving others has been such a huge part of your life, and it's also a huge part of mine. How do we convince others to join us?
Well, you know, the great thing about service is that you get more from it than you give, but people don't know that until they try. And so, you know, I try to encourage people. Volunteerism, I think, is really important. Mentoring is one of the most important things. When I talk about helping young people, they need a father figure. They need a guide. And so just giving your time, maybe it's just a half an hour once a week to a troubled kid, but it changes you. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the rewards you have in service. You know, I've served 3 commissions for 15 years in Grand Prairie, and I love serving. You know, I haven't gotten any money from it. You know, you don't. but you know, just knowing that maybe in some way you've helped advance the city in some way, yeah, it feels good.
You have been successful in so many different venues. What are some key habits that has allowed for that success?
Well, I believe in a strong work ethic. I don't have, I mentioned before that I don't spend a lot of time watching TV. Use your time wisely. For instance, like I try to read 1 book every week and a half. It's not Tolstoy's War and Peace, you know, it's not huge, but just the idea that you keep your mind active and fill your mind with good things. So I think a strong work ethic is terribly, terribly important. And if you're going to accomplish something, you've got to have a strong work ethic. I think respect for authority, which I've seen waning, which bothers me. Like I'll go to public schools sometimes, not in Grand Prairie, but I've gone to public schools. I won't mention one town. And I'll have maybe some cases, and nobody holds the door anymore. A kid will come by and they'll bump you in the shoulder, and they don't say sorry. And I don't like seeing that, because I think that comes out of your home. I think teachers don't teach that. I think parents teach respect for older people and respect for authority. So I have it, but I've seen with a younger generation we're losing some of that. So I think a strong work ethic, a respect for authority is really important. That includes teachers. I mean, teachers have so much to give to you, but it's kind of like they can't give it to you if you don't accept it.
You've been on this earth more than 7 decades, and by the way, you look great. What would you tell young people is the key to having a happy, purposeful life?
Well, you know, happiness, I'm just going to dwell on that for a second. We confuse that with joy, and it's 2 different words. For me, joy is, you know, knowing I'm going to heaven someday and knowing all this means something. Happiness comes and goes with events. I don't have good days. I mean, I don't always have good days. I have bad days as well. One of my biggest lessons came from suffering. You know, testifying against your own family is hard. You know, I lived in a monastery for many years, so I had a vow of celibacy. The fact that I got married and had a son was wonderful, but then he had major health problems. We had 3 open heart surgeries. And through the suffering, you sometimes learn more things from the difficulties in life than the good things. And we lived in the Ronald McDonald House in Chicago, which we couldn't afford a hotel, so it was like $5 a night. And one thing is, we would help other parents that had, you know, children who were very, very ill or very sick with cancer. And a lot of times you'd hear crying through the walls and their child would die. And so one of the things that really has taught me in life is you never know what life's going to throw at you. Everybody wants to be happy. You know, when I'm a pastor, so when I perform a marriage ceremony, I say for better or worse, in sickness and in health. Well, nobody wants the worse. They want the better. For riches or poor, no, people want the riches, not the poor. And sickness and in health until death do you part. Nobody wants the death, nobody wants the sickness, but it comes, it's part of life. And so what I've taught people is, if you keep balanced and you just realize that you can learn from suffering. Now, suffering can make people worse, and suffering can make you better. It all depends on your reaction to it.
Don, you have left us with so many great nuggets. It was so insightful and inspirational. Thank you. Thank you for being on our show today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And we hope you'll join us for many more Wisdom Wednesdays.